Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and we have the most super panel of super panels. We are going to talk about decline of Western civilization, the metal years, part 2. We have a panel that are going to talk about their first impressions of the movie in the day, talk about one or two memorable scenes and what their opinion of the movie is in 2024. So going around the grounds, we've got Peter Jones from the Contrarians. Hello, my friends. We've got John Clauser from My Music Corner. We've got Reed Little from the Contrarians. Hello. We've got Steve Deluxe, Rock and Metal Invasion. Peter Wicks, my man from Melbourne, wixxyleaks. And last but not least, Mr. Mike Ladano from Grab a Stack of Rock. How are we, gentlemen?
Fantastic.
Super. How are you?
Great.
Thanks
for inviting me.
Fantastic. So, all right, let's start off. We'll go to you, Peter. What was your first impression of this movie in the day, The Decline of Western Civilization? Pete Jones.
Thank you. And so it begins. Great to see everybody. This is a very interesting time for me. I'm trying to remember actually when I first saw this. It wasn't really too long after it had been out, whether I saw it in the theater or at some point when it went on video, or I may have even seen it at some point if it was played on MTV, which I believe it was for at least some period of time. I have very deep and very intense feelings about this era of music. I had finished up college. I was starting to work full-time as a musician, and this whole industry was counterintuitive to everything that I thought was important as a musician. And it's going to sound like I'm a snob, and I will raise my hands. Yes, I'm a snob. I didn't work at my 10,000 hours to be a musician so I could worry about how high my hair was, who I was sleeping with or not sleeping with, the lowest common denominator of lyric, music, everything. It just bugged the crap out of me. I lost work because we didn't look right. Never mind, we played most of these bands in the clubs I was playing under the table. They didn't want to follow us because we'd kill them. But we didn't look right, so we would lose the big gigs. So that's a personal part of it, but it's really wrapped into it because it does have a very strong impact on how I view this. And going back and watching this again, it just reminded me of all the things that I just disliked about this period of time. I broke it down. I mean, I look at the look of it. I mean, it's foolish. It's a badge of honor for me to not have closet photos somewhere of me and my band with our hairspray and all the other nonsense. First of all, let's just be realistic. I'm almost 6'3". I've always been a very big guy. You don't want to see me in spandex, guys. You don't. It's ugly. It's just stupid. I'd look like an idiot. Most of these guys were like 115 pounds wet. It was just a look that I just was never interested in. The music, and it's going to be harsh, but it's honest. I found it empty, disposable, irrelevant, talentless dribble. That's kind of succinct, right? The whole view, and I saw it in the clubs, I saw it in everything. This was sex first, music second. Look, I'm no angel. I'm not a perfect person. I've got a million flaws, but that's just not how I view my music, and that's not how I view art, and it just pissed me off. And the whole scene was just this kind of lowest denominator of debauchery. And that sounds like the get off the lawn guy, but and it doesn't sit any better today. I have always thought that since rock and roll was started in the 50s, that this short period of time, and let's be honest, this was a very short period of time. It had tails. It did start to work in, but we're talking about maybe late 86, 87, by 89, 90, we know it was gone. And thank goodness for that it didn't last very long. Most of these bands were not nearly as popular as we would perceive them to be, or they didn't last nearly as long as we thought they did. So the whole thing too is that I think there's just an underlying treatment, and this is where I'm definitely going to sound my age. I'm 61. I thought the treatment of women is despicable, and I just have no tolerance for it. I have no patience for it. So I didn't support any of it, and the fact that it died a very quick and brutal death, I have no sorrow, no sadness. And this movie outlined exactly all those sentiments that I was talking about. It just is a mirror, and you almost don't even need to have any real dialogue. If there was no commentary, all you had to do is watch and listen to them talk and perform, and you go, yep, sad. This is just a bad period of time. And so that was my initial view, and it has only been reinforced in 2024.
All right. Well, you packaged both the initial and the later day review, but that's okay. There's a lot to unpack, and we'll come back to you when we talk about certain moments in the film. No, well done. That's very eloquent.
Yes.
John Clauser, what about your first impression of this movie?
Well, see, for me, back in the 80s, when I first watched it, it was probably on video. I probably rented it. And, as I'm watching this, and I look at this old band logo that the girlfriend that I was dating in high school, may she rest in peace, had designed. And I was like, I remember watching this movie and I'm thinking, you know what? That's me. That's me. There's characters in there, like the kid with the baseball cap, the one who's the real sexist pig and stuff like that. Well, that wasn't too far from who I was back in 1988, 1989 or something like that. So I was like, yeah, this is, because I was writing lyrics. I wanted that dream of doing the band thing. Never materialized because after I got out of school, I started working, and I realized work was a necessity, and I wasn't living in an area that had musicians. So the band thing was never going to happen. So yeah, I saw myself in this movie, and I thought, man, that could be me one day. But then I won't go into the 2024, but I will say, as I watched it later on in life, I would watch it now and be like extremely depressed, because that could have been me, and I didn't have a plan B. You hear all these kids and all these guys talking, we're going to make it. Well, what's your plan B? We're going to make it. They had no plan B. So it depressed me. So how I look at it in 2024 is a little different than that. But that was my first impressions. I saw me in that movie.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Reed.
Okay. So, needless to say, my experience was a little different. So I tell pieces of my history here and there, and anybody who maybe saw my piece on the Contrarians knows I was a Montana mountain man. I came out of the mountains in 1986 down to Oklahoma City, which was the first big city that I had been to, but I was going to a very small, very conservative college, and I did not really integrate with any kind of hard rock scene at that point. But in the summer, this film, it starts off, tells you right at the beginning, it was filmed late 1987, early 1988. In fact, shoot, here, sorry about this. August 87 to February 88. So, and it was in theaters in June 1988. So in June of 1988, I had gone to live with a friend of mine in Tacoma, Washington, and just spent the summer in Tacoma. And that was the first summer that I was exposed to heavy metal subculture. I had been listening to the music for, at this point, functionally 8 years. but I didn't know what the people who listened to the music were like. It was just me. So I had gone to Tacoma and met the other people who were in the fandom, and it was a bit of an eye-opener because I was not a party guy, I was not a drinker. Where I was going to college, that would get you kicked out of college immediately if they caught you with a beer in your hand. I know those kinds of things strike people as very strange now. But now, any social scientist will tell you, a lot of what you remember is completely incorrect. Your own mind just makes this stuff up. And I was having this I was convinced, and I've been telling everybody, I saw this movie in the theaters. And now I don't know if I did. I know I saw it in 1988 or early 1989, but I distinctly remember going to a midnight show and seeing this movie, but it may have been in Oklahoma City later when I got back to school instead of seeing it in Tacoma. But I do remember that the people in the theater, completely irreverent, everyone's whooping and hollering. And, the people were drinking in the park. They treated it like a concert. Now, clearly, Penelope Spheris, one of the knocks against her as a documentarian is that this is the most biased product you can possibly imagine. A documentary generally is attempting to tell not an unbiased story, but at least an objective story. There's not the tiniest attempt at objectivity. And I maintain, regardless of negative feelings by some of the panel members, there is room for objectivity in this scene, but none is attempted to be applied to this. She picked out purposely the dumbest people that she could find. And if you talk to the people that came off well, Lemmy sounds great. Alice Cooper had been the voice of hard rock for 18 years. That man was born to give interviews, and he sounds great when he's talking. So there wasn't much she could do to make him look dumb, but she did everything she could to try and make Lemmy look dumb, and she staged things with Ozzy and other things. But certainly all of the other things that she did with people in that movie were done to emphasize how stupid they were. Which is why the people that come off well, I think, come off extra well. And there are people that come off quite well in the movie. So it's not like this relentlessly negative thing. Now, whether you like the music or not, that's another matter entirely. Looking at it from 2024, I think it's fascinating to anybody who isn't paying real close of attention to the dates, the conspicuous absence of Guns N' Roses. But you have to really watch the dates because when this movie came out, GNR was nobody. Appetite for Destruction had come out, but it hadn't even gone gold yet. They were on tour with Alice Cooper, but nobody really cared who they were. And being on the soundtrack for this movie was actually a way for them to get publicity, if you can think about that. But I had the soundtrack. We used to listen to it. In fact, I liked the Alice Cooper Guns N' Roses duet on Under My Wheels. I thought that was a pretty good track. So I thought the movie was horrifying, but I thought it had some cool parts too. And, I've always been somebody who appreciates an intellectual approach. And if you look for that, there is some of that in the movie, but Penelope Spheris does her best to bury it. And now I'm a part-time professor. I do teach research, and I pay a little bit more attention to certain things in movies. And as an adult, I definitely pick out different details than I did. We can go into those when we get to anecdotes.
I'm looking forward to hearing from that. All right. Steve Deluxe, what was your first impression?
Yeah, well, the thing, I think some people already said, that memory of actually where did I watch it or how did I watch it, because it's a long time ago, but I do remember hearing about the movie and think, I've got to see this, I've got to try and see this, but I don't even know if it got a release in the theatres here in New Zealand. It possibly did in like a film festival or something like that, but, I guess I would have been 17, 16 sort of thing when that came out. So I don't know what access I would have had to get to a film festival at that time. So I'm pretty sure I saw it on video cassette. Finally got a video release And so I'm pretty sure that's how I watched it. And yeah, when I watched it, I was just thinking, this scene is like nothing like I've got where I live. This does not exist. I don't even, when I walk down the street, I don't see anyone with that sort of hairstyle or anything like that. And I just think I just want to get over it. I want to go to LA. This looks like the place to be. So I mean, I kind of already knew about that scene through magazines and music videos and so forth. But yeah, it didn't have a negative effect on me at all. I felt really like, I thought it was pretty cool. I thought, I was looking at my hairstyle and thinking, oh, I've got to get rid of this mullet, got to grow it out more on the side, So yeah, no, it was pretty positive. Yeah, I mean, I did think, even then I thought, oh, that person's like a bit of an idiot, or, yeah, I definitely saw the silly parts to it, but, it's like, I like that kind of music. I was into that kind of music. I was picking up a lot of the hair metal stuff that was being released at the time. So, and there were like bands on there that I didn't even know about or hadn't even heard before. So yeah, it was interesting to me. Yeah, and like when Kiss, when they were on there, Paul Stanley especially, like I didn't even think it was staged. That's what I thought. I thought that was real, and I was thinking that guy's living the life. That's So I just the whole thing for me was like, that's the life I wanted to have, sort of thing. And it was real positive. It's my opinions have obviously changed, but yeah, at that time, that's what it was.
Well, it's an honesty session, folks.
Yeah.
Where we were, what we were thinking in 1987. That's what it's all about. Peter Wicks, what was your first take on this film?
Well, it's an honesty thing. So I have no idea where I first saw it. I know it was back in the 80s, late 80s when I saw it, but I don't know whether it was on video or at a theatre. You'll probably tell me I watched it with you. I've got no idea, no recollection of where I was or anything. But so my views, I can only guess what my views on it would have been first up, and I'd like to say that the portrayal of women and all that sort of stuff was a terrible thing. But back in those days, I wouldn't have said that. So back in those days, I would have thought it was pretty cool. There'll be a lot of picking out the dumbest people and all that sort of business. But I suppose the clue's in the name, like the whole Western society. She's obviously not going to have picked out the rogue scholars or anything like that. So I honestly can't remember, but I think I would have been right up there and loving it. The metal scene in Australia was pretty small, so it would have, for me, I think I would have seen it in a chance to see what's going on overseas, because we didn't see it over here. I don't think we had MTV at the time. We never really had proper MTV. We only got a weekly MTV show. So it was all pretty invisible to us. We only saw what we saw in magazines. So I would have just been keen to see what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just do a quick tack on from my perspective, just continue the Australian view. I saw it on VHS. It did get a release in the movies, albeit like a late night cult movie. So we had shows like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the Blues Brothers playing at 11 o'clock or midnight at the local cinema. And this was running for about a month, doing midnight sessions. When I first saw it, I thought, is this a rockumentary or a mockumentary? The thing that sort of picked out to me in the day was this, as Pete Jones was saying, there's not a lot of musicology. It was all about the scene. And I kind of found this kind of hard to take when I was watching it. I mean, it was entertaining, a little bit voyeuristic. That was my sort of impression of the day. There are a lot of scenes in the movie that were discussion points after the movie, which we will talk about. I won't bring it up in my discussion, but there were one or two infamous moments that just have such an impact on you. One involving a pool and a vodka bottle. The rest of it sort of pales into insignificance. And that was kind of my sort of take of the movie. It was sort of more thinking of those particular scenes and the actual talking heads. I probably found it humorous. I probably found it voyeuristic. But my opinion has definitely changed in 2024 to what it was in 1986, 87. And Pete, I think you'll agree that the folk in this clip were not like the metalheads or the gig goers that we were hanging out in any shape or form. There were some glam folk that used to come to gigs, and we used to go to a couple of those glam shows, but they were nowhere near these type of folk that were in this movie. So it was sort of like from Mars as far as we were concerned. Would that be fair enough to say?
Yeah, the glam element we used to get at the gigs that we went to would be like about 5% of the audience, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Mike.
Well, unlike you guys, I didn't see this movie in its completion until 2004. But I'm going to say that seeing it in 2004, that it's pretty much irrelevant because my feelings in 2004 are the same as 2024. What really matters is the first impact that I saw in, I guess you guys said it was 88, Much Music in Canada. Our music video channel had a show called the Pepsi Power Hour, and they ran a lengthy special on the decline of Western civilization part 2 with some scenes, extended scenes, more than a trailer, but less than a movie. And you mentioned 2 of the scenes already that were part of this broadcast that I saw. Those both affected me greatly. And so did the third scene, which was a montage of the airheads that all wanted to be rock stars. Oh, I am going to be a rock star. I am going to be a rock star. And one guy in particular, the guy with black hair on one side and blonde hair on the other side, who, you know, I'm going to be a star because there's nobody else around there like me. And I'm like, yeah, but there's a reason for that, because that's not what I'm looking for in music. Anyway, long story short, as a young guy in high school at that time, and having also come from the Catholic school system, there was constant bashing of metal and criticism of metal, and in a serious way. I mean, like in Catholic school, I was like set aside in the class and given shit for wearing a Judas Priest t-shirt. You know, I was asked if KISS stood for Knights in Satan's Service. You know, this was serious crap. In the movie, they talk about these demetalizing centers. That was a real thing. That was something that, as a kid, worried the crap out of me. Not that my parents would have ever sent me to a place like that. They were very open-minded about music, but I always felt on the defense. I always felt like people were saying, metal's dumb. This music is stupid. These people are drug addicts. They are bad influences. And then this movie came out, and all of these scenes that I saw reinforced all of that, all of those stereotypes. And I felt like, man, my back is up against the wall here because of this stupid movie that's making the music that I love, that I'm constantly standing up for, look awful. And, you know, like I said, the string of the airheads, the one guy, I wouldn't mind being a rock star or nothing. You know, it's like the bad grammar is in my head from 30 years ago. I was really, really disappointed with what I saw. And I was like, this is setting the cause of metal back 5-10 years. And when I saw the movie, well, I guess we'll get to present day impressions. But, you know, when I saw the movie, I liked certain aspects of it. I thought the Paul Stanley on the bed with the girls was kind of funny. It was totally taken straight from the KISS Exposed gimmick. Alice Cooper, Lemmy, even Poison were charming. But then the lion's share of the movie was just like chicks and alcohol, and these were things that, quite frankly, I was not interested in that way. Like, I liked girls, but my friends and I, we'd watch music videos, and we'd be so disappointed if the music videos were just a bunch of girls dancing when we wanted to see the lead guitar player shred. You know, we didn't mind if there was like one girl in the video, like Twisted Sister Hot Love or something like that. You know, that was cool. But when the videos were dominated by women, it made us uncomfortable. This is the kind of stuff that our parents don't like. This is the kind of stuff that they're getting on our case about. And Western civilization, man, that's how I felt about it when I first saw those scenes. Like, this is not good for metal. And it's not good for me, because now I'm going to have more kids at school that are saying metal's dumb. Ozzy couldn't even pour himself a glass of orange juice, you know? So, you know, I guess I was, I think I've made my point. I just felt like it was not helpful in any way, shape, or form. Reed mentioned that it was not exactly what you'd call a unbiased documentary. And yeah, I'm not saying it had an agenda or anything, but I mean, the first damn interview in the movie is with a parole officer. So, like that was, and Phil Donahue. You guys remember Phil Donahue? There was always like Satan and music, Satan and alcohol and drugs, and my kids are on drugs and they've gone crazy. Now their hair is dyed black and it's down to here and it goes up to here.
Yeah.
This movie just
rewinding
perpetuated.
records. Remember the old backward masking and rewinding records?
Yeah.
We used to
Exactly.
get taught scripture at school, and there would be this. I think Pete Wicks, you probably had the same thing, and bring out all these. If you play "Stairway to Heaven" backwards, it says "smoke marijuana" and backmasking. It was all this sort of stuff.
Well, Iron
Anyway,
Maiden actually did put a backmasking on "Peace of Mind," and it's Nico McBrain saying, "Don't mess with things you don't understand." And that's what it is.
Well, Pink Floyd experimented with it too for a bit on the wall.
yeah.
And the Beatles, obviously, on the White Album.
Well, you think if they did backmasking, it'd probably, please buy this record or please sell more records.
That's right.
Instead
That's what Ozzy said.
doing an
Ozzy
ode
said,
to Satan.
Ozzy said, "Why would I put a subliminal message on my record that says kill yourself? I'm killing my own customers."
That's right.
Anyway. All right, Pete Jones, you want to talk about a scene in the movie, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, a couple really good quick observations, really great points from everybody. Mike raised something that I want to address like right away, because, if you were older like I was, and, you considered yourself a pretty normal kind of person, you had a hard enough time if you were into hard rock and metal from a music standpoint, let alone trying to do it as a musician when you were growing up, because nobody took you seriously. My Nana, bless her heart, has been gone for decades, but she bet me $5 in 1975 that Kiss wouldn't last 5 years. Well, Nana, you owe me a shitload of money. The point is that when something like this comes along and it just plays into everybody's stereotype, it plays into everybody's, see, we told you. It just makes it so much more difficult if you're legitimately into hard rock and metal as a musician and you love the music, but you don't drink. I don't drink. I've never done drugs. I've never even tried a cigarette. It doesn't make me better than anybody. It's just what I did or didn't do. And when you don't do that and you're into metal, they're like, what's wrong with you? I mean, you really do, right on the side. No, I don't. It's the music. It's always been the music. And if you can't defend it on that level, it makes it really frustrating. There are a couple scenes, you talk about Paul, and look, he did the same thing in the Kiss, Exposed. He's in bed, and of course he's got the monkey and with him and everything. But it was one of his quote. It was his quote that I wrote down, because this is something interesting. He said, well, and we have to remember, rock and roll was music that was basically made by people who were thinking with their crotches. No. No. Not on any level. Is there a societal impact? Absolutely. We can go from Elvis and all the other stuff. Are the Beatles, are there impacts socially and that kind of thing? Absolutely. But I don't think that's why they started, and certainly not the majority of them. I wouldn't agree with that on any level. And the other is, you'd mentioned our friend prosecutor. Of course, here's a 6 and there's a 6. And, at this point, and you're like, okay, the scarier part is those people who think that it is so beyond that we're now going to use it to control a society and have a secret cult and a secret religion. And it's vaudeville. Alice said it all the time. It's show, it's circus, it's nuts. You just make it more difficult. And we have to remember that during the end of this decade as well, Judas Priest was on trial for 2 young boys who took their life because they're saying it was Priest's fault. You get to that level, It is now way beyond just, someone in an office going, I think it's it. Okay, you're in court for your lives and your livelihood and everything. Now it's gone really serious, And the other quote, and then I'll let you guys go. I think that, there's a strong delineation when I went back and looked at it between how women were treated and how they were viewed. There is a strong separation between the women's attitudes who were band members versus the women who were not. The band members were like, I don't need the guys' help. I'm not this. Screw them. We're out for ourselves. We're going to work hard. We're going to show them we can do it. We're being held down because we're women. And then we have Miss Gazaris, who said, well, I'm just looking to get on with my actressing. I'm sure your parents are very, very proud.
All righty. Thanks, Pete. John, what do you share a moment?
Well, okay. Well, I feel like if I don't talk about,
yeah, you got to do it. You got to do it, John.
It's yours.
I mean,
You gotta do it.
come on. Chris Holmes in the pool, and he's sitting there with his mom, and he's just like not even listening to the questions. He's just like, you could tell he's probably 3 sheets to the wind, maybe. I don't know how staged all of that really was, but he's just like full-blown alcoholic sounding. He takes that bottle of vodka, which I can't imagine. One, I've tasted vodka. You don't guzzle vodka. That burns. And his voice sounded normal like before when this started. So I kind of believe that couldn't have been vodka in that bottle. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Can I say something real quick, John?
Yeah.
I have a Blackie Lawless interview on my channel where Blackie says that entire thing was staged. It was water. So that's what Blackie says.
Okay.
I'll do a further thing. Penelope Spheris in an interview said that half the bottle was vodka and the rest of it was pool water. So we've got some conflicting stories here.
A little bit of everything. Well, but it's, if anything, it cemented the idea of the rock star that Chris was trying to be. And, he only was on Headless Children after that album or after that movie came out. And then he was gone out of the band. Wasp breaks up or whatever, and it just becomes the Blackie Lawless show. So now, good on Chris Holmes. He has been sober since 1996, I think, if I remember correctly. So good on him for that. But that scene didn't do him any favors. And I agree with everybody else. I think scenes like that within that next year and a half, the spandex pants would be ripped off the hair metalers, thanks to the grunge movement, the Seattle sound, whatever you want to call it. And that was just one of many scenes that I think would I think that pretty much ripped the pants off. But yeah, I think if I was going to speak of another real quickly, I was really disappointed in some of what Aerosmith, like Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, were saying. There for a while, they both came across real, just almost arrogant at times, even a little bit douchebaggery at times. It only wasn't until they started talking about their addictions and how they tried to overcome it. That's when you took them more seriously. At least you didn't get that with Chris Holmes, unfortunately. He was just full-blown alcoholic. But at least with Joe Perry and Steve Tyler, yeah, they both come across as pretty much like jerks for a little while, but then they show how they sobered up, or at least tried to start sobering up and start taking life a little more seriously. So you did see them kind of turn around a little bit. But yeah, those would be the scenes that kind of sticks out to me, amongst many. But
Thanks, John. And just a little bit of background to the Steve Tyler part of the interview. Apparently, they had minders really close to them because this is where they were first time detoxing, and apparently they were casing the studio and the cushions and the couch, making sure that there were no drugs. So apparently Aerosmith for half the day filming were very edgy. So that's just a little bit of background from an interview from Penelope Spheris. Reed Little, a couple of moments you want to share with us of this movie?
Sure, I could come up with dozens. Pete, I have to very respectfully disagree with you on rock and sex. Rock and roll is about sex. It's always been about sex. The term refers to sex. The rhythms of rock and roll come from sex. Many of the performers were sexually based. It's a sensual type of music. Now, there are certainly, that doesn't mean every musician in rock and roll. I mean, obviously, Paul Stanley is casting a very wide net, but yes, you cannot separate rock and roll from sex. That goes all the way back to the origin of the term. I just think that's part of it, man. Now, in terms of the movie's continuing influence, I think this is actually a really fascinating thing. Maybe I'll save that for later, but I'm afraid if I don't bring it up now that I'll absolutely forget. I think the influence of the movie comes much more from things like this, from people talking about the movie, from people watching highlights, people watching that scene of Chris Holmes in the pool, people watching Ozzy Osbourne staged, people, watching these interviews, people seeing little highlight reels, because nobody saw that movie in the theaters. I was looking earlier, it had a production budget of about $500,000, which is peanuts. It made less than $300,000, or just over $300,000. Nobody went to see that movie in the theaters. Now, people did eventually rent it on VHS. A lot of things get VHS legs, especially back in the day. But said that the influence of it comes very much because it's such a biased documentary. And this is why, one of the many reasons why such obvious bias is so damaging, because you can pick out these little things that are targeted and just say, oh, look how stupid these people are. And it's just this constant barrage of negativity. Nobody pulls out the things of Alice Cooper talking very rationally about his career, because where's the entertainment value in that? It's a circus, right? You want a performing monkey out there. Alice Cooper is a very smart man. He makes very cogent points. He does not provide entertainment for people that just want to think that heavy metal musicians are idiots. So they're not going to use him in their highlight reels. So that's just one reason why these biased programs are annoying the crap out of me. But I'm actually going to go a completely different direction, because my favorite scene in this entire movie, my favorite scene, is Faster Pussycat. They're interviewing Faster Pussycat. Faster Pussycat are giant douchebags. Sorry, they're talking, they're avoiding the question. And I mean, Penelope's asking dumbass questions. Why do you write songs about sex? That's just a stupid question to ask a bunch of young guys. It's a dumb question. But the guitar player in Pink, Brent Muscat, I actually don't know how he says his name. He lays out some actual financial information, and I find this endlessly fascinating. He says we play 4 nights a week, we get $1,000 a night, and it costs us $2,500 a night to be on the road. How often do you get actual financial data from a band? Almost never. And bear in mind, these guys, again, I'm going to say this, they were bigger than Guns N' Roses at this time. Now, that lasted basically for the filming of The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, and then Guns N' Roses lapped them and took off. Although they did have one top 40 single, House of Pain. And Tammy Down was half owner of the Cat House, the club that they're playing in. But think about that. They made $1,000 a night playing. There's 5 of them. They're clearing $1,500 a week. That means if they split the money evenly, and I seriously doubt they did, but if they split the money evenly, they made $300 a piece, or just over $15,000 a year. Back in 1988, I had to do some research for this. Minimum wage in 1988, $3.35 an hour. So if you were flipping burgers full time, your yearly, or you would make $134 a week. So playing in Faster Pussycat, you made not quite 3 times minimum wage. The median income in America, and there's a statistic for you. Median income in America, 1988, $14,000 a year. Now this is median. If you understand statistics, there's a lot of caveats that come with that. But so median $14,100 a year, $300 a week put them at $15,600 a year. So they were actually living a middle-class lifestyle at $300 a week. Again, if they were splitting their money evenly, which I doubt they were. I bet Tammy was making the vast majority of that because he was writing their songs. And he also owned the club, so he had a supplementary source of income, and et cetera, et cetera. But I find that endlessly fascinating that somebody actually laid out money. And you can tell there's a moment when all of the other guys in the band look at him and go, would you just shut up? Like, they do not want him talking about the money. No one ever, it's very embarrassing to talk about the money. But I find that absolutely just fascinating. I wish the other bands, there was one point where the guys in London, they do say, we rarely get paid, but we'll play for a bar tab. I don't think he's kidding. I do not think he's kidding at all.
There's also all those scenes where they're talking about that's the female fans that are paying for everything for them and keeping them alive. Yeah.
And there's another scene. It may be in a different movie, but I swear they're talking to Dave Mustaine. It may be that the version I watched most recently preparing for this may be a truncated version, but where he talks about finding women to buy him food because he didn't have any money to eat. So yeah, these guys, until they made it, they were dirt poor. And some of them were dirt poor even after they were able to play clubs. But once you got a record deal and started touring, you actually could theoretically survive for a couple of years if your expenses weren't too high and you weren't shoving it all up your nose.
Mm. And then there was also reference to a record contract, which puts them in debt, which they have to pay off. I think there was a reference
London.
to one.
Yes, London.
Yeah, London.
London talks about that.
Mm. Yeah, and London had been around for a while. I think they started in the early 80s. I mean, I saw them like 5 years ago. They'd been around forever, but they were the breeding ground for, I think Nikki Sixx was in them, Blackie Lawless, correct me if I'm wrong, John. They've been around forever. And yeah, it's quite shocking to hear that, in the later 80s, this band that's been a breeding ground for so many musicians is really kind of dirt poor playing for tabs. Mm. There you go.
I think Slash was in London. You notice they actually just, at the time, they just say one of the guys from Guns N' Roses was in London because he wasn't worth mentioning at the time.
Yeah.
I find that's just, again, I find this stuff very interesting. The fact that GNR, when this film came out, they just weren't yet popular enough, and yet the film came out just as they were on the edge of breaking huge.
It really coincided, really. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, any moments that you want to share out of this film?
Yeah, I'll go with Odin. Now, Odin are kind of like one of the lesser known bands that are profiled in the movie, but they are really sure they're going to be huge, right? And I found that really interesting. They were like, it was almost like, we are going to be successful, or basically life's just not worth living, And the lead vocalist, and I thought this was a bit sad actually, the lead vocalist Randy O, they're all in the spa pool, which I find out later is actually, I think it's Penelope's spa pool, so it's all kind of staged, right? It's at her house, and she gets them in the spa pool, and they've got their girlfriends with them, and they're having a few drinks, and they're talking, and it's all kind of upbeat, yeah, you're going to be massive, we're going to be huge. And then Randy talks about that he's actually thought about killing himself. And it's like this real sort of like downer moment, sort of like everyone's like partying, and then everyone's like really quiet and and he's sort of like saying, yeah, I have thought about killing myself. I did try it or tried to or whatever. And basically he's talking about the fact that, yeah, if they don't make it, then the life's not worth living, sort of thing. So I thought that was quite interesting. I think it's sort of they have a lot of confidence. But also they're also like, especially like it seemed that way from Randy's point of view, that that it was like success or nothing, and of course, watching it and then realizing, well, what ends up happening, the band actually, I think their Odin album only got a Japanese release, so that, they didn't get much profile in their own country, and then they split up. And actually, I don't have anything by Odin, but I do have the album by a group called Lost Boys, and so this is actually this is Randy O. So this is his band, and he's the singer in this band. This is released on Atlantic in about '91, I think. And it's also got Jeff Duncan, who was also the guitarist in Odin. So those two guys take off and they form Lost Boys. Possibly they had to, form another band because they came off looking maybe not so great. I don't know what happened, but Odin it didn't work out. But then nothing happens with this as well. I don't really know exactly what happened with Randy O. I know that Odin have done some, reunion gigs from time to time. So he's still around, But and Jeff Duncan's the guitarist in Armored Saint, so he's done okay. He's still in the biz sort of thing. But yeah, it was just obviously there's we can look at that movie and sort of say that there's a few sort of unfortunate, sad moments in it, but I thought for a movie that's supposed to be, we're having a great time, it's a big party, and then you've got one guy sort of saying that he's thought about killing himself, and if he's not successful, then life's not worth living. That was my big sort of takeaway one of my big takeaways from the movie.
Yeah, that's it's kind of it is a disturbing moment in the movie. It's sort of not cheery.
No, yeah.
In any shape or form. Peter Wicks, couple of moments.
A couple of moments. The one that I thought was funny, and I don't know if it was, I think it was fake, but anyway, it's the bit with Ozzy with the orange juice, because the footage cuts, and then it's like it's on Ozzy, and then there's a cut, and then it goes to the orange juice. But Ozzy not being able to pour his orange juice and it going all over the place, that's really the scene that sparked an entire reality TV show.
It's fake.
Yeah,
so
it's really fake, yeah.
Penelope, in an interview, said, well, firstly, that's not his house. It's Penelope's producer's house. So he was cooking bacon and eggs. And second...
He was attempting to cook bacon. That's
in
the
somebody
rawest
else's
bacon
kitchen.
Ever.
I'm being kind, Pete. And the orange juice was basically a cutaway to somebody else. So, Mockumentary.
Well, there you go. Well, hey, at least his dressing gown seemed to match the wallpaper. I don't know. That was by fluke. The other scene, the Chris Holmes scene, with the vodka and whatnot. I mean, yeah, it was a lot of it was staged and whatnot. But what's not staged in it is the fact that he thinks that's what his fans want to see, which I think that's his fans want to see someone living that lifestyle. So whether it's fake or not, that's his intent, is for people to think that's the lifestyle he's living. And I thought in that scene there was a couple of clues where he sort of let his guard down and let slip. And I found that whole scene rather tragic and sad, even if the booze was fake or not. it sort of led on that he really wasn't that happy with his life the way it was. But the one, I don't know if if you call it a scene, but the bit where the lady says they go for demetaling, or they have to demetal people, that struck a chord, because there was a lot of that going on over here, as you'd remember, Pete, with certainly the far right religious crazies that were going out there and, you know, doing album burnings and playing things backwards and whatnot. But in the current day, it reminded me a lot of the whole "Pray the Gay Away" movement that seems to be, you hear a lot about, you know, these religious groups that want to pray for people to not be gay. The demetaling seemed to be along the same lines. So, I don't know, think of that of what you will, but that's what it reminded me of at any rate.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the scene, it's the Chris Holmes scene that gets talked about to this very day. So I think if you went to somebody that's seen the movie, that would be the first thing they talk about. And I find that a tragic scene.
Mm.
I'd like to get your views, John, but I think it killed Wasp. I think it really killed their commercial momentum in the water. Inside the Electric Circus would have been out at that time. I think Blackie would have been absolutely filthy.
He was.
I think that would have just killed any credibility. They were, you know, getting some sort of a following. But I think that was a career killer, because it just made, because you associate Chris Holmes with Wasp, and, you know, I just think that from a marketing perspective, it damaged them completely. And I don't know, you folks remember, I've got the latest version of this movie on Blu-ray. But in the day, I saw a VHS version, and I don't know if it's been changed, but I recall a scene where his mum is at the right or left, one or the other, and he's talking to the mum, and he goes, "Hey, Mum, do I beep like a beast?" In the original version. Now, that has been cut out, and the camera pans to the mum, and she has this look of just pity, disgust. That's exploitation. And that's the thing about this movie. You just can't get, I just can't get my head around that. It's kind of exploitative. I know I've read interviews with Penelope, and she said, "Oh, look, we saw the footage of Chris Holmes and we thought we couldn't use it." I've seen an interview with Penelope and Henry Rollins, because they're from the punk scene, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And Henry's fawning over Penelope, and he goes, "Oh, what I like about this documentary is you're not judgmental." Yes, you are. You are judgmental, because you're probably casting these people to show them in the worst light.
Absolutely.
And to put people in the worst light, it's like clickbait on YouTube. You know, you want to get views, and you've got to hang your hat on a scene, on an angle. And this was like motherlode gold that they had this Chris Holmes scene, because it gets spoken about. You still have folk going over to France, they interview Chris, and it always comes back to this interview in the pool. He will never live that down. And you can't deny it's exploitative. And it probably killed Wasp's career. They were never at that peak with that first album, which went platinum on Capitol Records. I reckon it killed them. It made them a laughing stock by association of Chris Holmes. And Chris Holmes is a good guitar player, but he looked like an absolute numbskull. There's some other scenes in the movie. I take the kiss scene with Paul Stanley. The story goes that that Penelope had got some fans of Kiss, and the girls, so to speak, in Penelope's words, were average looking. And Paul Stanley said, "I'm not going to be sitting on the bed with average looking girls." So Penelope had to be pushed to go up to Hugh Hefner in the Playboy Mansion, got a bevy of beauties, and that's what is on show. So Penelope tried to push Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons to be a bit more like an Alice Cooper and give more of a social commentary on rock and roll, but they were in that sort of persona and they wouldn't move from that. So that's something that sort of stuck with me, it's, you know, a scene to this very day. But I think for me, the Chris Holmes scene is the one. I find it tragic, I find it sad, and it hangs a heavy shadow. I think after you see the movie, yeah, you're still thinking about it.
Mm.
What does that say for the rest of the movie? Because I think 4 of us have already talked about that scene. And there's like so much more to the movie, but yet that's the one that all of us have come back to, or a lot of us have come back to pretty quick.
John, it's the most shocking scene.
Yeah.
Because you've got somebody that's probably crying for help, emotional, alcoholic.
There you go. You nailed it. That's what it is right there.
Crying for help and being exploited. And yeah, I just, you can't get past that scene. Mike.
And the thing is about
Sorry.
what you just said, and he's been exploited. The funny thing is, I don't think he realizes he's been exploiting. He thinks he's the one he doesn't realize it's the tail wagging the dog, so to speak.
100%, Peter.
Yeah.
Supposedly Penelope owes him some money from that scene as well. Like, I think it's like she had promised to pay him for it and never did. And then in a recent interview, she said, "Yeah, I'm going to get round to paying Chris that money, or if Chris gets hold of me, I'll send him the money." But
yeah. Well, one more thing I'll say about Penelope, she's from the punk scene and she listens to punk music, and I think that she had a particular sort of conception of what metal was, and that was her modus operandi for this movie. Sorry, Mike, over to you.
No
What's
problem.
your couple of scenes?
I just want to see if I can find my soundtrack album, because I had it on vinyl, but then I was in a bit of a rush and I seem to have misplaced it. I wasn't able to do my prep. I was rushing home. Yeah. Okay, never mind. I wanted to show off my vinyl, but
I've got it here.
There you go. I wanted to talk about a couple of scenes already brought up by Steve and Peter. Steve mentioned Odin. And first of all, like, I didn't really remember the music from the movie so much when I rewatched it last week. And I actually have never listened to the whole soundtrack. I only listened to like the Megadeth song, the Cooper Guns N' Roses song, and one, I think there's a Queensryche on there.
Yeah.
So I only really, and they weren't in the movie, were they?
Prophecy. It was a demo version.
Prophecy,
of
that's
I
right.
think.
Yeah, that's right. It was. So anyway, I'm watching this movie again, and I don't particularly care for this Randy O character. And, you know, the guy sitting in the hot tub with the shaved chest and a woman on each arm and talking about committing suicide if he doesn't make it. And I'm like, you know, I know people who've taken their own lives for very, very dark and serious reasons, and I felt like that was almost a mockery. But then I'm seeing this live footage of Odin on stage, and as much as I don't want to like him, that song 12 O'Clock High is stuck in my head a week later. That Randy O could wail. He had a great voice for that kind of song. So that was kind of my takeaway, as a musical takeaway from that scene, is that I really didn't want to like this Odin band, but damn, that guy could really shriek. He sounded like Axl to me. And, you know, kudos. That's you sing like that, your voice goes pretty quick. You're young before your voice goes, you know. And I also thought the name Odin did not at all suit the music. I didn't know what to expect from the name Odin, and knowing Jeff Duncan from Armored Saint, Johnny Klauser and we did that Armored Saint episode. A lot of praise for Jeff Duncan on the Symbol of Salvation album. So I assumed Odin were a much heavier band than it turned out they actually were. And I'm sure that had something to do with their lack of success. But apparently they were Bill Gazzari's favorite band, I believe he said. Odin!
For several years.
Odin! Right. And it's like, it's not even a really good name to chant. Odin. It doesn't even sound good when you chant it, you know? It's not like you're chanting like, we want gas, you know? Anyway, that was my takeaway from that scene was musical, in fact, which is, I actually like a lot of this music. A Faster Pussycat. I didn't think I liked Faster Pussycat, to be honest with you. I didn't like him in the 80s. But when I heard Bathroom Wall in this movie, and I'm watching these guys, play those guitars, I'm like, I'm thinking about buying that first Faster Pussycat album. I don't know. Maybe you guys can give me some feedback on that.
It's a classic.
Don't
ask
buy
John
it.
Don't ask John Clauser.
Don't ask Johnny Clauser. Okay. Well,
I suffered through them 3 times live. It was, I still have nightmares about it.
Well, fortunately, the album is studio. So, you know what, Peter, I might go ahead and I might go ahead and buy Faster Pussycat, and that would be the second time that you've made me go out and buy an album. The second scene that I want to talk about is, well, we've all talked about the pool scene already, but it's just sort of an aside. As a Canadian, we have the metric system here. So when Chris Holmes is saying he drinks 5 quarts a day, and then he says, quarts, pints, who cares? And then I'm sitting there realizing, we have the metric system. I have no idea what a quart or a pint is. So maybe one of you guys can kind of enlighten me. How much does Chris Holmes drink a day? And does he still have a liver at this point?
A pint is 600 mil.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Peter's going to pull one and just show everyone.
I wish.
There are four quarts to a gallon here in the U.S. So if you have a jug of milk or water, that's a gallon. Quart would be 1/4 of that.
Okay. So he drinks 4 quarts or 5 quarts a day is what he said, or pints. He used both forms of measurement. And like you guys, I was, what's the word to use here? Not touched. That's not the right word, but taken aback, perhaps. Hey, doggy. I see a doggy behind Peter. I'm easily distracted. I was taken aback by that pool scene, I didn't want to see my rock star heroes in that light. The very first button you remember rock buttons? The very first button I ever bought was Chris Holmes. And he's got a white and red guitar and he's going like this because Chris Holmes was my favorite one. And my best friend Bob, he's like, you got to buy that button because nobody else in town will have it, And just to see him in that light. Wasp were in the first 3 metal bands that I ever liked. Ever. It was Wasp, Kiss, and Maiden in that order. That was the order in which I started listening to metal. Man, it staged or not, there's clearly, as you guys alluded to, there's clearly something going on there that's not healthy.
Mm.
I don't believe that Chris Holmes was pouring vodka into his eyes. But on the other hand, what Peter said, if it was a mixture of vodka and pool water, and he's chugging pool water with all that chlorine, that's pretty gross too. Like this is not a pretty stunt. And for his mother to be at poolside is very grotesque. And the look on her face in certain shots, as you guys have all said, there's a look there that's just taunting. And obviously Chris did have to clean up. What was the Wasp song, John? Mean Man. They're talking about doing white lines and all that stuff. The guy that wasn't a joke. That was Chris Holmes. He was the mean M&F and man. And it wasn't pretty. And I guess, to this day, I see that scene and it takes me to different places because he's obviously trying to be funny, but whether he was actually intoxicated or faking it, it's always been said it takes a drunk to play, or at least a former drunk anyway, to play a convincing drunk. And he was utterly convincing in that scene. There's one scene, and it still just makes me so sad when she's repeatedly asking him, Chris, why do you drink? And he pours the bottle all over his face. He goes, because it makes me happy. Make me happy. And he says it exactly in that voice. And that's just, if that's not sad, I don't know what is. And it's also very telling. We all talked about how that scene was, it haunted Chris Holmes to this very day, and how it's the money shot and all this other stuff. It's very telling that they left that scene towards the last quarter of the movie. Chris Holmes doesn't really appear in that movie until the last quarter. They saved it for impact. So maybe Chris Holmes was using that as a cry for help, but he was also definitely being used, and the proof is in the editing, I believe.
Yeah. That scene is the only reason anybody remembers that movie exists.
Yeah, Reed, you're right. The soundtrack isn't particularly memorable when you play it front to back. Well, I wouldn't know. I've never played it front to back, but it's not particularly memorable. And yeah, now I'm really just sad now that I've talked about that scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, maybe we'll just wrap it up with some final thoughts, and maybe just to reiterate our 2024 opinion, views of this movie. Pete Jones.
Yeah, I'll just recap real quick. I kind of touched on it my first go around. I didn't care for it then, and I care for it less now. It's one of those things that you look back and, Reed and I will have a discussion off about the whole sex thing. I'm not ignorant. I know that there is obviously a correlation, but I don't have to follow the lemmings off the cliff. The point is that of so many of the ones that survived and moved on quickly found out that whole aspect of it was a doomed road. Alice quickly got himself fixed, and look at Alice. Aerosmith guys, they struggle. They're addicts. They're always going to be addicts, and they're going to struggle the rest of their lives because it's a disease. We look at Paul Stanley now is like, well, you don't get that stuff from Paul. He's not having people on his arms, any of that kind of stuff. He is the husband. He is what we see and what we know. Gene took a long time and a threat from his lady going, you change or you're on your own, pal. And now he looks back in hindsight and goes, I was the biggest a-hole ever. So we can look at it in hindsight, and even those people will look at it and go, that was the wrong thing. And the other thing that I'm just going to say real quick is that it's interesting because you do see a delineation. Of course, Gene comes on and says, anybody who says you started a band for the artistic part of it is lying. You get in it for girls. Well, Gene, you did. And in the same breath, you can go to our friend, Mr. Bruce Dickinson, and he goes, girls? No, girls mucked up bands. He said, we didn't get into a band to get girls. We wanted to play music. So there's always two sides of a coin, if we may say so, and we get to choose individually which way we want to go. So, but no, I revisiting it now just made me as frustrated and maybe even more angry than the first time I saw it. So,
thanks, Pete. And just a quick question to you, Pete. Who do you think comes out best in this movie? Out of all the talking heads, is there anybody that shines?
It's funny because we kind of see them as an afterthought. And we look at their history, and it's short, but Vixen kind of rode through the middle of it, where they're going, hey, Roxy doesn't need some guy's help. Like I said, they were fighting two fronts. They were fighting the fact that they were women trying to get into this guy's thing, and then fighting, hey, aren't you? They had stories where the lead singer couldn't get into the gig because they thought she was a groupie. And she's like, no, I'm the lead singer. Oh, no, women don't do this kind of thing. And, so I thought they kind of got to their point. They had their 15 minutes and kind of worked their way through it. And I thought, well, you know what? Good for you. The rest of them, flush.
All right. Thanks for that.
Nope, thank you.
John Clauser, final thoughts 2024?
I think, as I alluded to, the movie, as I would watch it later on in life, the movie depresses me now because of, what was it? I think, Mike, you had said Chris Holmes was your favorite. It would be like, don't meet your childhood heroes. Maybe it's best to not meet your heroes because sometimes they aren't going to be what they seem to be. And that's kind of what this movie kind of does. Gene and Paul and Ace and Peter were my childhood heroes growing up, and to see them as the way they were maybe in 1988 was wonderful. But then later on, now as a 54-year-old man, that just doesn't fly in 2024 for me. So it depressed me. But again, as I alluded to, all the young guys and girls who said we're gonna make it. There is no plan B. I'm like, no, guys, you got to have a plan B if you want to, unless you just don't, if you don't want to live life. It's just a sad perspective of life. Even the two girls they had on there were, they talked about sex and, and getting with the bands and stuff like that. And I'm just like, wow, are they really denigrating themselves that much back then? And I'm like, wow, it just was a sad take on life. And I'm like, and to think that I saw myself so much like some of those young guys who wanted to make it in the music business, but thankfully reality got hold of me and I didn't go that route. But did it kill my love for Wasp, that movie? No. Maybe it did something for me with Chris, but at least with Wasp, I stuck with him because as far as I was concerned, Wasp grew up lyrically. And I saw myself appreciating that a lot more. Again, kudos to Chris. He got himself cleaned up. Yeah, he'll never live that thing down. And I know he probably regrets it. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But he'll never be the same. But I think Blackie at least made an effort to at least roll with his life, and he weathered the storm as best as he could. But Chris didn't. But that's my thing.
Thanks, John. And who do you think comes out best in the movie out of the talking heads?
To me, I think Alice Cooper. Because Alice, what you see in 1987, 1988 Alice, you're going to get pretty much the same Alice in 2024. I don't think it's going to sound much different, and I think he came out the best of all of them. I think.
Okay. Thanks, John. Reed, final thoughts on this movie?
Well, let me just say in general, I think it's a piece of crap. I think as a movie, it's terrible. I think Penelope Spheris is a terrible filmmaker. I think she should be ashamed of the actions that she took while making this film, but ignore all of that. I think it's an interesting document. This movie actually takes place at a pretty bizarre time because it's just before the crash on the Sunset Strip. So it's actually a document just before the end. Now, of course, because of the timing, she did not know that it was just before the end. But as she is filming this, those bands have 2 years of life left to go, except for Megadeth and Ozzy, Ozzy's career is about to take off. But I think there are so many fascinating things in it. The variety of music, because there are so many different types of music. Yeah, she talks to Poison. And Bret Michaels has always been a raconteur. He's charming. He's just this side of being a total douchebag, right? He can be he's sleazy, but he's not so sleazy. You're like, I wouldn't let that guy near my sister. He's got funny stories. Now, CeCe DeVille and Bobby Dahl, those guys come across not as good. CeCe DeVille comes across as one of the dumbest people you will ever hear. This story about, it doesn't matter if you make enough money to buy a Le Mans. It just has me rolling every time. And Penelope has to point out to him, that's a Pontiac. But Ricky Rocket, the drummer, comes off great. And if you see interviews with him now, Ricky's got a drum company. He builds custom drums. And actually, he's doing quite well. And Brett Michaels has gone on to do all kinds of entertainment-related stuff besides music. But you've got that, and you've got Faster Pussycat. You've got the weird hybrids, like Seduce from Detroit. I actually liked the 2 songs they have from Seduce. I thought they were pretty good. For an opening level act, I mean, they were never going to break huge, but I liked those songs. There's something about the guy from Odin, that voice. He sounds just like the lead singer of Bang Tango. If anybody remembers that band, that
Joe
voice
Lestay.
is just like, yes, that voice is nails on a chalkboard to me. And then at the end of it, you go to Megadeth. And you ask me, it is Megadeth who comes off looking best because Penelope wants them to look best. She's a punk rocker. At this point, thrash metal is as close to punk rock as metal gets. And Megadeth were as close to punk as you got in thrash. They were the punkiest of all the thrash groups. But that hilarious bit, and looking back at it from 2024, when the guys in Megadeth, like, the bass player, and I can't believe I'm...
Ellefson.
Yes, thank you. Ellefson, Dave Ellefson, is talking about how he doesn't do drugs before he goes on stage. And of course, you know, Dave Mustaine and Dave Ellefson are both notorious druggies back at this time. And to hear him talking so self-righteously about how you can't play their music if you're, if you're high, I'm like, it's like, can you imagine Tony Iommi going, well, you can't play Black Sabbath if you've been snorting coke. You just couldn't take it seriously, right? These guys did a lot of drugs. And generally, if you ask a rock musician if you do drugs, when they hear the word drugs, they mean heroin. And when they say we don't do drugs, they mean we don't do heroin. So they'll do everything else except heroin and tell you, I don't do drugs. Bit of social commentary for you there. People hate it when I do social commentary, but that was a true thing. Peter, you probably ran into that back then. I've had people tell me I don't do drugs and then light up a joint right in front of me, and I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, sure.
That's even a line in the movie Half Baked. I don't do drugs, just weed.
But
This
now
show could
Jeff
go many
Young,
directions.
the poor Jeff Young. Jeff Young was a monster guitar player, still is. And he ran into, Dave Mustaine kicked him out of the band because he was high so much and paranoid, and he thought Jeff was running around with his girlfriend. And I happened to, So Far So Good So What, the album that they're recording while they put out this, while they did this movie, is one of my favorite Megadeth albums. Love that freaking album. So Megadeth comes off looking great, and I just think that shows you the bias of this movie, because Megadeth was just as bad as every other band in this movie in terms of their behavior. Just as bad. Maybe not Jeff. I don't know their drummer at all at this point. He was gone after the next album. And like I said, poor Jeff may not have done drugs at all, but he was a casualty of Dave Mustaine's drug addictions. So, but those guys were notorious druggies.
Who's on the cover
of which?
of the?
Exactly.
It's Dave.
It was huge.
It's Dave.
Huge publicity for Dave Mustaine to be on the guy for the
on
Metal
the cover
Gear.
of the LP. He was the marquee picture. It was Dave.
And Dave I shouldn't say was, he is an intelligent guy, and he gives a good interview, and he comes off well. But she allows him to come off well, and he is no smarter and no less on drugs than anybody else she interviews in that movie. And that is an indication of the bias of the movie and why I think it's a giant pile of crap. But I think it has some good music in it. And, Pete, I absolutely respect your opinion on that. I do. We're individuals. That's why we're contrarians, man.
And there, folks, is the clip to promote this show. Alrighty, Steve Deluxe.
Yeah, well, I rewatched it again recently, because I couldn't remember how long ago since I've watched it. I was actually thinking to myself, have I only watched this once? But it's like you say, with the Chris Holmes thing, because that clip comes up on my YouTube feed from time to time, or, you just feel like I've seen that scene about 10 times, right? So there's certain parts of the movie I think I've seen little clips of from time to time over the years, but I thought I'll watch it from start to finish again recently. And I was thinking, if I was a 17-year-old, like when I was 17 when I watched this the first time, if I was a 17-year-old and I watched this now, I'd think it was pretty cringe. I'd think, if I get my son to maybe watch it, not now because he's only 10, but maybe in a few years, if I get him to watch it, I mean, he's going to think, well, he already does think my record collection is rubbish, but it's certainly not going to make him want to go and pick up, my Lost Boys album or any of that type of stuff because these guys don't look cool. But yeah, and as we talked about too, you're kind of watching it, and it's not the most uplifting experience. It does make you feel a little bit sad and depressed. I'm thinking, why did I think this was cool? How did I get into this? Why have I got so many records that sound exactly like this? But the thing is, I guess, I like the music, and I guess as well, too, I used to think this back in the day when I read the magazines and I'd read the interviews, and all they're talking about is all the drugs and all the sex they're having. And even as a 17-year-old, I was like, well, can you just, talk a little bit more about the music? And that's what I actually really want to sort of know a little bit more about, But, yeah, so it's obviously different, looking at it now at this time. I thought too, Bill Kazari, he just comes off like a dirty old man, in that movie, right? And I mean, do guys like that still exist? Possibly, but I think there was a lot more of them in the 80s. And I was thinking as well, because I got the soundtrack out. I was looking at the soundtrack and I was thinking, oh, this is interesting. Odin's not even on the soundtrack. But Ahmed Saint, so that was it's a little bit bizarre. I mean, it's not a bad soundtrack, but there's no Kiss, there's no Aerosmith. I guess they couldn't get some of the bigger names. I thought it was unusual that Lizzie Borden, who are in the movie, but they're doing Born to Be Wild, so they're not doing one of their own original songs. I thought that doesn't really showcase them in a very. They're a good band. They're some great songs, and they're doing a cover song. I mean, they sounded good, but that was a bit unusual. And yeah, I just think it's still a fun watch. It's still good to watch. It's a document of the time, but I mean, I don't necessarily think it's totally that's necessarily what all the bands were like at that time. It's just some of the bands that they chose and selected. I think that movie people talk about what killed hair metal, and often Nirvana's quoted, listed. But it was possibly also this movie. I mean, not just this movie. It's probably a whole list of different things. But I don't think this movie helped. I think some people would have seen this movie and thought, actually, Megadeth came off looking pretty good. Maybe I'll get into thrash metal a bit more. You know what I mean? Like some of those other bands, the bands that came off well, I'm going to get into. But there's this hair metal, that sort of, party metal kind of stuff is a bit silly. So the glam metal, yeah. So I think that's possibly part of the death of hair metal is this movie. But yeah, I mean, surprisingly, Poison actually came off pretty good, I thought, which was a bit of a surprise. But I think probably the best person who came off the best for me was probably, I mean, there's a few, but probably Lemmy. And I'll read out a quote that he says. He says, if you think you got what it takes, run it up the flagpole and see who salutes it. And he was always so good at coming up with those little quotes like that. So I'll finish with that.
Well said.
So Lizzie Borden, that was their single. They put out Born to Be Wild as a single. It was a very, very minor hit, tickled the bottom of the charts. It was as close as they ever came to having a hit record. So that's why it's on the soundtrack.
Mm.
And Bill Gazzari would die about 3 or 4 years after the movie came out.
Yeah, he doesn't look well. Anyway. All right, Peter Wicks.
Oh, sorry. 60? I was like...
Seriously? 60?
That's what he says.
69 and a half.
All right, whatever. Peter Wicks, final thoughts.
I watched it again this morning just before doing this. I think it's great as a time capsule, if you like. It's great at capturing that moment in time. And as a moment in time, I suppose it's one most of us who are in it should probably look back on with shame. The way that women were portrayed and everything like that is just woeful. It's just something shocking, and it's interesting. A lot of it was very focused on the glam aspect of metal, other than Megadeth, who came off quite well, which I thought was interesting. So it was almost like, as you know, over here we were talking about before, we didn't really have a glam scene in Australia. It made me think that she's only really focusing on one aspect of the metal scene. So with a bit of a nod to Megadeth as well. So like the scene that got me with metal was more the Metallica, the Megadeth, that type of scene, which didn't go for all the hairspray and makeup and whatnot. And that's kind of more like the scene we had in Australia. As far as a movie on heavy metal as a genre goes, it's certainly not one I'd recommend. Metal, A Headbanger's Journey, I think it's called, is far better as a documentary, and much later. And it while it still goes into those areas, it gives a better broad view of heavy metal, I think. As far as who comes off best, totally agree, Lemmy. I think Lemmy has a complete knack for not really caring how he appears, and he always tells it like it is. And for better or worse, I think, he's quite open about his where he in things that he does wrong. But Lemmy comes off the best because he's brutally honest always. There's nothing staged about it, I didn't think.
Yeah. Thanks, Pete. Well, in looking back at the movie, I found it a little bit of a depressing experience because the times that I saw it previously, which was maybe 10 years prior or 15 years prior, I guess I thought it was a bit of a laugh, sort of a bit more jokey. The darkness in some of these people kind of depressed me a little bit, like the Chris Holmes narrative. And I think there is a definite bias. So I think the filmmaker, she's coming from a scene that is probably completely at polar odds to this particular scene. I don't think she's got a good ear, eye, or feel. I think there may be some stunt casting because reality TV, reality documentaries per se, there is casting. It's not just you get a camera and you go into a club. You've got to get people to sign a waiver that they have their image on the movie. So there's a certain amount of casting and production, and I think they were definitely catering to a particular percentage of, the douchebaggery, the people that will have talking points and be a little bit more outrageous. So I think there was a lot of prodding, a lot of staging, for 3/4 of the movie, it's more mockumentary than documentary. I agree with you, Reed. Megadeth come out the best because I think Penelope has a bias to that sort of music. She could see that was a happening scene because San Francisco, the Bay Area, all those thrash metal bands were becoming a big thing, and glam was kind of on the way out, other than Guns N' Roses, which was kind of an entity unto its own. So as a movie experience with 2024 eyes, it's still interesting, but I just think that there's too many disturbing elements, too many exploitive elements for me to totally enjoy it. I think it's an accurate representation, and the best people that come off it are Lemmy. He's articulate, he's intelligent, and apparently I've read interviews with Lemmy that she was shooting off these really kind of double-edged sort of questions, attention grabbers, and he was just firing it back. and coming off really, really well. Even Ozzy, I know it's kind of jokey, but it's really unusual to him sort of semi-coherent and do a little bit of a dialogue there. It's a little bit strange comparative to what the next reality show he was going to do with the Osbournes. But anyway, so I'll say in summary, my views about the documentary are quite mixed and probably more on the negative than the positive. So I definitely don't share the same feelings in 2024 that I had in 1986.
What no?
Mike Ladano, let's finish it up. What's your final 2024 views of this movie?
Okay, so final 2024 views of the movie. The blatant objectification of women made me uncomfortable. That may come as sort of ironic considering the shirt that I'm wearing, but there's a difference, There was an extreme in this movie. And, I think we're all pretty much unanimous that this is not a good documentary on metal, but perhaps it is a good documentary on the debauchery of that particular scene at that particular time, maybe, because there's a lot of it. And, just seeing Randy O in the hot tub with arm candy on him, that wasn't why I was listening to this music. Yes, have we ever objectified a woman? Yeah, guilty, sure. But man, in my 2024 eyes, it made me really uncomfortable. There was also some discussion of AIDS, very lightheartedly, like, I don't really practice safe sex. And it's kind of like, you're smacking your head, It's like, use some common sense. But it was a different time. That was the time. That was it, I didn't like it. I never did. I never liked this movie, and I still don't. I think there's some great stuff in it. We've mentioned Poison. One of my favorite lines in that movie is when somebody says, or Penelope asks him, "Tell me about the girls." And Ricky Rocket goes, "What? Who? Did somebody say something?" And I just thought, that's funny. That was a line. He wasn't serious. He was just being funny. And I liked aspects of the movie. I liked some of the music. As for who came off best in that movie, man, I can't believe none of you have said this, but it's the guy with one side of the hair black and the other side blonde. I mean, come on. Look at, are you guys familiar with the band The Warning? The lead singer, Danny Villarreal, she has that hair. So there you go. This guy was so far ahead of his time that a girl that wasn't even born yet is now copying his hairstyle. So he came across the best. No, I'm kidding. Alice Cooper to me, because he's always witty. He's always smart. He's whip smart. He always has been. And of course, he has that wisdom of having come back from the edge. I think he mentions in his scenes, how he used to, throw up blood, from the drinking. He's had that experience. He's overcome that experience. I got to be honest with you. I admire Alice Cooper very much as a rock fan. I love Alice Cooper. I think he is a remarkable artist and probably in real life a remarkable human being. And it comes across in this movie. Whip smart, sharp wit. Love Alice Cooper. And no surprise, when did Alice Cooper and Penelope Spheris hook up again? That immortal scene in Wayne's World, right?
Right.
Everybody, as much as we all talk about the Chris Holmes scene in this movie, Alice Cooper is the scene that everybody references in Wayne's World. Everybody talks about that scene. Everybody loved it. So that's why I would say Alice is the star. And of course, it's, in my opinion, that spun off into his role in Wayne's World. And I love that guy.
Can I throw just something out real fast here?
Yeah, sure.
I mentioned when I was playing with my band in Denver, this is from 88 through 91, just so people don't think this was something that was staged or something for, or is unique just to the LA scene. We're in Denver, middle of the country. We practiced at a band house that rotated between 3 bands. Each band had 5 members. Of the 15 band members that went in and out of that house who played in the circuit in town, 3 of us had day jobs. The rest, all were dating strippers and got all of their, it's not a joke, I'm not kidding. And they were all getting the things they needed groceries, food from the people, the women they were dating. So I'm you can't make it up. I watched it. And then to have it reiterated, so I mean, that's where I came from. I mean, I don't want to beat that dead horse, but it was a reality. That was the way they thought. That's how they're going to, and the other two bands were much more glam. Again, I mentioned our band didn't do that at all. So they were the hairspray and the whole thing, and they were living it because they thought that's the way it's supposed to be done. And it was very interesting to watch.
Well, thanks, Pete. That's a nice little finish to the show. And I guess we all agree this movie is a snapshot in time. And in 2024, it's like from a different planet. It's a world that doesn't exist, all that scene. But rock and roll, it always gets recycled. Glam, hair metal, it'll come back, maybe in a different shape or form, but who knows what it'll be like. Wonderful to have a cast of characters here. We've got Peter Jones. Thank you very much, mate. Wonderful to have you on the show. John Clauser, My Music Corner. Reed Little from the Contrarians. Steve Deluxe from Metal and Rock Invasion. Peter Wicks, my mate. wixxyleaks in Melbourne. And last but not least, wonderful Michael Ladano from Grab a Stack of Rock. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Click the bell. We'll put all the links to all the various shows that these folks are on. But one thing's for sure, you'll see the various characters on this show in some shape or form in 2024. See you later. Cheers.